Hi, my name is Kelly Vlahos with WTOP, WTOP.com. I'm here with Neil Augenstein, a WTOP reporter, who has put together a wonderful podcast about a 42-year investigation about the murder of Sheila and Catherine Lyon in Montgomery County. We're on the second episode, and Neil is here to talk a little bit about that second episode, which explores the critical hours after these girls' disappearance from the Wheaton Plaza Mall and some of the witness accounts and sketches that came out of that. Neil, can you break it down for us?
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. The second episode of the investigation continues. It's called Sketches, and it deals with eyewitnesses who provided police details of people they saw with 12-year-old Sheila and 10-year-old Catherine Lyon in Wheaton Plaza Mall in the hours and minutes before the girls were last seen on March 25th, 1975. We hear about it from reporters who actually talked with both of these witnesses. The first one was a 13-year-old girl by the name, who the reporter Anna March called Darlene. That's not her real name. Darlene was a friend of the Lyon sisters, and she was there with them at the mall that day. Darlene reported that she saw a 20-ish year old man who was leering at the girls while they were in the mall. She described it as making her uncomfortable. She could tell that something was wrong. She told Anna March that this guy was too close to the Lyon sisters. She didn't say anything to the Lyon sisters directly, but she spoke to the man, and she said, "Why don't you take a picture? It'll last longer." And that it's not clear whether he reacted when she said that. But this young lady, Darlene, was eventually questioned by police. And a couple of days later, she went in and she provided information to a detective, and he drew a sketch of the man that she saw. There was another witness, someone by the name of Jimmy. That, again, not his real name. He was 13 years old. He was a neighbor of the Lyon sisters, and he had seen a 50-ish or 60-year-old man, well-dressed, I believe it was white hair, talking to the girls and trying to get them to talk into a microphone that he had. And he thought that it was attached to a cassette recorder. And he was like interviewing the girls. In fact, Jimmy said that he heard the man say, "Do either of you like sports?" And so when Jimmy told his story to police, they were interested in that, and they provided, and he did an interview with police and provided information for another composite sketch. Jimmy's sketch was the one that was eventually released to the public. And so the public, the first suspect, or at least person of interest that the public was aware of, was this man who had the tape recorder. And he became known as Tape Recorder Man, at least unofficially and to the public. And for years, that was the image, the only image, that the public saw. And that's who people were looking for, the so-called Tape Recorder Man. The image, the sketch that Darlene provided information for was never released, at least not in 1975. And during my research for this podcast, I learned that the reason why it wasn't released was that the detective who had drawn both of the sketches was concerned that this was not a very good likeness. And he was concerned that detectives would get all of these false tips. And so, at his suggestion, the man pictured in Darlene's sketch was not revealed in 1975, and so that's sort of where we are in today's episode.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, but before we go on, I just want to say if anybody out there has any questions, please just you're free to ask them right here, and we'll answer as many as we can here on the program. Okay, so can you set the scene a little bit? So the girls are in the mall, and was this woman who gave this or described this leering guy with the girls, is she considered the last one to see the girls, at least at the mall? And she gave this sketch to the police, the one that hasn't been seen or wasn't seen for many years.
Right.
Now that sketch looks nothing like the other sketch of
Correct.
Tape Recorder Man.
Right. There's no similarity at all. The person who Darlene described had long hair, again about 20 years old. He had acne. He had scars on his left cheek. So there was really no similarity in those sketches. Now, what's interesting is that even if the sketch itself wasn't terribly accurate, police also did not make known to the public that an 18 to 20-year-old man was leering at the girls. So, and to sort of jump ahead in the story, we didn't know about the person that Darlene described until 40 years later.
Jeez.
And we didn't know about it until a person of interest was named in this case. And that person of interest, if you've been following WTOP throughout the years, his name is Lloyd Lee Welch. And he lived in Kensington at the time. And he was determined by police to be the person of interest in the case. And when police first made clear that he was the person of interest, almost 40 years after the case, they showed a mugshot of Lloyd Lee Welch that was taken in 1977, 2 years after the girls disappeared. And this was, I think, for burglary. And side by side, the mugshot of Lloyd Lee Welch looks almost exactly like the sketch that of the man that Darlene had described, but was never made public. I do know that when police disclosed and named Lloyd Lee Welch as the person of interest, they did not say that the photo or that the sketch that looks just like him was one that we had in 1975. That's been learned, by reporters since then. And a few weeks ago, when I called police and wanted to ask them about the specifics about why they had not released the sketch back in 1975, I was reminded that there's a gag order in this case now, and so that's not something that police are at liberty to discuss right now. But perhaps it will come out in trial. But police still have not thoroughly described publicly their decision making in not releasing the sketch that Darlene had generated.
Now, I don't know if this is jumping ahead in the series, but do we have any indication of Welch's movements over this period of time? You mentioned his arrest for burglary. Do we have any other indications on whether or not he had a longer career in crime and
Sure.
in the area?
I'm glad to jump ahead now because people who have tuned in have demonstrated they're interested in following the details of the case. When Lloyd Lee Welch was named the person of interest in this case. The reason why he was named the person of interest was during the period of time between the time when the Lyon sisters disappeared. He had been arrested several times for child sex-related crimes. He was a drifter. He worked for a carnival. He was living all over the country. He was traveling. He'd supposedly been involved with young girls in different parts of the country. So police they certainly did know about his travels. In fact, when he was named a person of interest, I think that they released it was somewhere between 12 and 24 places where he'd lived over the years. And the reason why police did that was because they were hoping that there would be other victims around the country who could help tie him in to the Lyon sisters' disappearance. And that is actually how this case has predominantly been made, is that a lot of the similarities in Welch's behavior and crimes over the years ended up with him in a Delaware prison, which is where where Montgomery County Police began to interview him, and they've talked with him several times over the last 3 years, and he's told them quite a bit of information. But that's so in between the time when Lloyd Lee Welch was ignored as a person of interest by Montgomery County Police and 2013, he had built a long career, and that was what made police again interested and name him the person of interest in the Lyon sisters case. By now, I trust that everyone has attempted to subscribe to the podcast, and I thank you for that. You can do that on iTunes or Podcast One, and the way you get to iTunes or Podcast One is just going to the WTOP website, and the story about the investigation continues. There'll be a little blue hyperlink, so you can subscribe there on iTunes, or if you prefer, on Podcast One. And if you have any problems in actually subscribing, just leave a message in the Facebook comment section, and we'll help walk you through it so you can get that. And the benefit of that is that once you subscribe, then each Monday there will be a new episode of the podcast waiting for you on your phone. And also, looking way down the line, after this 5-part episode series is done, when we update this podcast, which we expect to do as the story develops over the years, we will send you. You'll get a notification so you know that there's a new episode waiting for you.
Fantastic. And we'll be back here next Tuesday at noon. So if you're listening to the podcast over that time and you have more questions, please save them. And Neil, you're also on Twitter. Your Twitter handle is?
Augenstein, WTOP. Always glad to take your questions, even if it's not a Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week, same time.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Take care.